So, hello and welcome back yet again to another evening with Miss Beverly of Graustark, where things seem to be heating up a little bit. I mean, they definitely are on to the fact that Baldos isn't who he's pretending to be. I mean, that was sort of obvious from the very beginning to anybody with a quarter of a brain. Even Beverly kind of knew that Baldos definitely was not just a goat hunter from the mountains. But they have a few ideas. The Iron Count, the leader of Graustark's military, seems to be getting set up as kind of our antagonist. He definitely is the one who likes Baldos the least. And yeah, other than that, we're still playing the everybody except for Beverly knows that Beverly is not the princess, or everybody except for Beverly knows that Baldos knows that it's very confusing. I'm really enjoying the ride, but it's a little contrived, and that's okay. I get the feeling that this book was written as just a light comedy, kind of like a Goosebumps novel for adults or something. Like, I don't feel like this is all that deep, and that's actually okay. I don't have to have every piece of fiction that I read be all that deep. Would I prefer some more unicorns in here? Yeah. I mean, you know, not gonna lie, I am very typecast. Give me a fantasy any day of the week. But I'm having a lot of fun with this. I hope you are too. And we are going to be jumping back in and seeing what else can go on in Beverly's life, as it seems like the possibilities of open warfare are heating up. The Count seems to think that Baldos is a spy. Everybody else seems to think he's a pretty good guy, and I don't know what I think. So we're going to jump back into Chapter 16 of Beverly of Graustark by George Barr McCutcheon, and Chapter 16 is titled On the Way to St. Valentines. By Jove, I like that fellow's coolness, said Laurie to Harry Anguish after the meeting. He's after my own heart. Why, he treats us as though we were the supplicants and he the almsgiver. He's playing a game, I'll admit, but he does it with an assurance that delights me. Well, he's right about that fort, said Anguish. His knowledge of such things proves conclusively that he is not an ordinary person. Yetive had a bit of a talk with him just now, said Laurie, with a sigh. She asked him point blank if he knew who she was. He didn't hesitate even a second. I remember seeing you in the audience chamber recently. That was a facer for Yetive. I assure you that it was no fault of mine that you saw me, is what she told him. Then was it your friend who rustled the curtains? He had said. Poor Yetive couldn't keep a straight face. She laughed, and then he laughed. Some day you may learn more about me. That's what she said to him. I sincerely trust that I may, madam, he told her. And I'll bet my hat he was enjoying it better than either of us. Of course he knows that Yetive is the princess, but it seems to be his intention to serve Beverly Calhoun, and he could not do that if he were to confess that he knows the truth. He's not dumb, that one. Meanwhile, Baldos was not long in preparing plans for the change in the fortress. They embodied a temporary readjustment of the armament and some alterations in the ammunition house. The gate leading to the river was closed, and the refuse from the fort was taken by barges by way of the main entrance. There were a few other changes suggested for immediate consideration, and then there was a general plan for the modernizing of the fortress at some more convenient time. Baldos laconically observed that the equipment was years behind the times. To the amazement of all the officials, Baldos was able to talk intelligently of forts in all parts of the world, revealing a wide and thorough knowledge and extensive inspection. Evidently, he had seen American as well as European fortifications. The Graustark engineers went to work at once to perfect the simple changes that he advised, leaving no stone unturned to strengthen the place before any attacks could come. 2, 3 weeks went by, and the new guard was becoming an old story to the castle and army folk. He rode with Beverly every fair day, and he looked at her window by night from afar off in the somber barracks. Beverly could not dissipate the feeling that he knew her to be other than the princess, although he didn't betray himself by word or sign. She was enjoying the fun of it too intensely to expose it to risk of destruction by revealing her true identity to him, because logically that would mean the end of everything. And no doubt he felt the same, and he kept his own counsel, but the game couldn't last forever. That was for sure. A month, maybe 2 more, and Beverly was going to have to think about her return to Washington. His courage, his cool impudence, his subtle wit charmed her more than she could express. Now she was beginning to study him from a standpoint peculiarly and selfishly her own. Where recently she had sung his praises to Yetive and the others, she now seemed strangely reticent. She was to understand another day why this change came over her. Stories of his cleverness came to her from Laurie and Anguish, and even from Baron Dangloss. She was proud. She was vastly proud of him these days. The Iron Count alone discredited the ability and the conscientiousness of the Mountainbach, as he named the man who had put his nose out of joint. Beverly, seeing a lot of Count Marlanx, made the mistake of chiding him frankly about this aversion. She even argued her guard's case before the head of the army, impudently pointing out many of his superior qualities as she advocated his cause. The Iron Count was learning forbearance in his old age, but he saw the wisdom of procrastination. Baldos seemed to be in favor, but someday he knew that there would be a time for his undoing. In the barracks, Baldos was also acquiring fame. Reports went forth with unbiased freedom. He established himself as the best swordsman in the service, as well as the best marksman. With the foils and sabers, he easily vanquished the foremost fencers in both high and low circles. He could ride like a Cossack or like an American cowboy. Of them all, his biggest admirer was Haddon, the man who had been sent to watch him for the Secret Service. It may be timely to state that Haddon was watching in vain. The princess, humoring her own fancy as well as Beverly's foibles, took to riding with her high-spirited young guest on many a little jaunt out into the hills. She usually rode with Laurie or Anguish, cheerfully assuming the subdued position that befit a lady-in-waiting who had apparently been restored to favor on probation. She enjoyed Beverly's unique position. In order to maintain her attitude as princess, the young deceiver was obliged to pose in the extremely delectable attitude of being Laurie's wife. How can you expect the paragon to make love to you, dear, if he thinks you're another man's wife? Yetive asked, her eyes beaming with the joke of it all. Oh, pooh! Sniffed Beverly. You have only to consult history to find an excuse. It's the dear old habit of men to make love to queens and get beheaded for it. Besides, he's not expected to make love to me. How in the world did you get that into your head?" On a day, soon after the return of Laurie and Anguish from a trip out to the frontier, Beverly expressed a desire to visit the monastery of St. Valentine high on the mountain top. It would be a long ride over a circuitous route by which the steep incline was avoided, and it was necessary for the party to make an early start of it. Yetive rode with Harry Anguish and his wife the Countess, while Beverly's companion was the gallant Colonel Quinnox. Baldos, relegated to the background, was bringing up the rear with Haddon. For a week or more, Beverly had been behaving towards Baldos in the most cavalier fashion. Her friends had been teasing her, and to her own intense amazement, Beverly resented that. The fact that she felt the sting of their sly taunts was sufficient to arouse in her the distressing conviction that Baldos had become important enough to prove embarrassing. Well, confessing to herself that it was a bit treacherous and weak, she then proceeded to ignore Baldos with astonishing persistency. Apart from the teasing, it seemed to her of late that he was getting a shade too confident. He would occasionally forget his deferential air and relaxed into a very pleasing but very reprehensible state of friendliness. A touch of his old jauntiness would crop out here and there. A tinge of the old irony marred his otherwise perfect mien as a soldier. His laugh was freer, his eyes less under subjugation, and his entire personality had become more arrogant. It was time, she thought resentfully, that his temetry should get some sort of check from her. And, moreover, she had found herself dreaming of him 2 nights in a row. How well this plan of hers succeeded may best be illustrated by saying that she now was in a most uncomfortable frame of mind. Baldos refused to be properly depressed by this misfortune. He retired to the oblivion she provided, and he seemed disagreeably content about it. Apparently, it made little difference to him whether he was in or out of favor. So Beverly was in a high dudgeon and quite low spirits. The party rode forth at an early hour in the morning. It was hot in the city, but it looked cold and bleak up on the heights. Comfortable wraps were taken along, and provision was made for luncheon at an inn halfway up the slope. Quinnox regaled Beverly with stories in which Grenfall Lorry was the hero and Yetive was the heroine. He told her of days when Lorry, back then a fugitive with a price on his head, and charged with the assassination of Prince Lorenz, who had then been betrothed to Yetive, had hidden in the monastery while Yetive's own soldiers hunted high and low for him. Quinnox dwelt glowingly upon the trip from the monastery to the city walls one dark night when Lorry had come to surrender himself in order to shield the woman he loved, and Quinnox himself had piloted him through underground passages into the heart of the castle. Then came the exciting scene in which Lorry presented himself as a prisoner with the denouncement that saved the princess and won for that gallant American the desire of his heart. "Oh, he was such a brave fella!" cried Beverly, who never got tired of hearing the romantic story. "Ah, he was wonderful, Miss Calhoun. I fought him to keep him from surrendering, and he beat me. I was virtually his prisoner when we appeared in front of the tribunal." "Well, it's no wonder that she loved and married him." "He deserved the best that life could give, Miss Calhoun." "You'd better not call me Miss Calhoun, Colonel Quinnox," she said. "I am a highness once in a while. Don't you know that?" "Oh, I beg your highness's pardon, then," he said happily. The riders up ahead had come to a standstill, and they were pointing off into the pass to the right. They were 8 or 10 miles from the city gates, and more than halfway up the winding road that ended at the monastery gates. Beverly and Quinnox came up with them and found all eyes centered on a small company of men who were encamped in the rocky defile 100 yards off the main road. It only took a glance to tell Beverly who comprised this unusual company. The very raggedness of their garments, the unforgettable disregard for consequences, and the impudent ease with which they faced poverty and wealth alike belonged to only one set of men, the vagabonds of the Hawk and Raven. Beverly went a shade whiter. Her interest in everything else flagged, and she was lost in bewilderment. What freak of fortune had sent these men out of the wilderness and into this dangerously open place? She recognized the ascetic Ravone with his student's face and beggar's garb. Old Franz was there, and so were the others whose faces and garments had become so familiar to her back in the day. The tall leader with the red feather, the rakish hat, and the black patch was the only one missing from the picture. "Well, that's the strangest looking crew I've ever seen," said Anguish. "They look like pirates." "Or travelers," said Yetive. "Who are they, Colonel Quinnox, and what are they doing here?" Quinnox was looking at the vagabonds with a critical, suspicious eye. "They're not robbers, or they would be off like rabbits," he said. "Your Highness, there are so many roving bands in the hills. I confess that these men are unlike any I've heard about, though. With your permission, I'll ride down and question them." "Oh, do please, Quinnox. I'm most curious." Beverly sat very still and very tense. She was afraid to look at Baldos, who rode up as Quinnox started into the narrow defile, calling to the escort to follow. The keen eyes of the guard caught the situation at once. Miss Calhoun shot a quick glance at him as he rode up next to her. His face was impassive, but she could see his hand clench the bridle rein, and there was an air of restraint in his bearing. "Remember your promise," he whispered hoarsely. "No harm must come to them." And then he was off into the defile. Anguish, not to be left behind, followed, and then Beverly, more venturesome and vastly more interested than the rest, rode recklessly after. Quinnox was questioning the laconic Ravone when she pulled up. The vagabonds seemed to evince very little interest in the proceedings. They stood away, disdainfully aloof. No sign of recognition passed between them and Baldos. In broken, jerky sentences, Ravone explained to the colonel that they were a party of actors on their way to Edelweiss, but had been advised to give the place a wide berth, so now they were making the best of a hard journey up to Saros, where they expected a little better success. He then handed over certain papers of identification, which Quinnox examined and approved, much to Beverly's secret amazement. The princess and the colonel exchanged glances and a few words in subdued tone afterwards. Yetive looked furtively at Beverly and then at Baldos, as if to inquire whether these men were the goat hunters that she had come to know by word of mouth. But both of their faces seemed hopelessly noncommittal. Suddenly, Baldos's horse reared and began to plunge as though in terror, so that the rider kept his seat only by means of adept horsemanship. Ravone jumped forward and, at the risk of injury, clutched the steed by the bridle. together, they partially subdued the animal, and Baldo swung to the ground by Ravone's side. Miss Calhoun's horse, in the meantime, seemed to have caught the fever and pranced off to the roadside before she could control him. So she was thus in a position to observe the two men who were down on the ground. Shielded from everyone's view by the body of the horse, they were able to put the finishing touches to the trick that Baldo seemed to have cleverly worked. Beverly distinctly saw the guard and the beggar exchange pieces of paper with glances that meant more than the words they were able to say. Baldos pressed into Ravone's hand a note of some bulk and exchanged a mere slip of paper for it. All of these papers appeared as though by magic, and the guard was remounting his house before he saw that his act had been detected. His expression of pain and her expression of despair sent a cold chill over Baldos from head to foot. Beverly turned sick with apprehension. Her faith in him had just taken a stunning blow. Mutely, she watched the vagabonds withdraw in peace, free to go wherever they pleased. The excursionists turned back to the main road, Baldos back to his accustomed place, his imploring look at her wasted, and Beverly was strangely, inexplicably depressed for the rest of the day. And that is the end of chapter 16. Honestly, I doubt that the note he exchanged was like secret info on the government of Graustark. It was probably, go up further into the hills, you idiots. I'm not supposed to run into you. But I'm sure that in the classic, what do you call it? Misapprehension? No, that's not what you call it. You know, the stupid trope where if people would just actually talk to each other, everything would work out. I feel like we're being set up for one of those, where she's now going to think that he's the bad guy, and probably going to turn to Count Marlanx, that old Iron Count of 3 wives and looking for wife number 4. And then he's going to get jealous. I can see it now. I'm probably wrong about it, but I feel like that we're doing that miscommunication. That's what it's called. I feel like we're being set up for a miscommunication trope. And sometimes those work, but usually those just kind of irritate me. We'll have to wait and see if that's what we're being set up for. But I just feel like we're going to end up with my knee bumping the table that you guys are sitting on. I feel like we're being set up for a big old miscommunication trope. Not that this book has not been that pretty much from the start. But yeah, what do you guys think is going to happen? I'm curious to know. And yeah, that's about it for tonight, though. Please do leave me a thumbs up if you don't mind. It does always make me happy. Subscribe if you haven't already. All of that yada yada YouTube stuff. But more than anything else, thank you for listening to me as I talk out my thoughts about this book. And yeah, stay warm. I think most of the United States right now feels like somebody left the freezer door open. So everybody stay warm, stay safe, and I will see you tomorrow.